Hi, everybody. I am doing my first live stream, so bear with me if I say things that come off a little bit differently. This is my first one. So I will start by introducing myself, and then I will dive right into our topic today, which is 5 ways to promote early communication in littles from a pediatric OT lens. So I'm Katie Crosby Both, and I'm a pediatric occupational therapist. I work in private practice in Chicago for a clinic called Amy Zier and Associates. And I also founded Thriving Littles, which is an online community, and I do video consult and Instagram and a blog. And I also have a new podcast. So check that out if you are interested. So you can find me at www.thrivinglittles.com or on Instagram at thrivinglittles, and always reach out at any time. I think one of the coolest things about the social network is that it is so social. So as you all know, by this rich community, it can be a really good place for connecting with others and getting to know people that you never would have without it. So here goes. So I will be talking about early communication. And I think what is neat about this topic is it's a way to promote communication, but it's also a way to promote development throughout the lifespan. So these are things that will strengthen connection and relationships and promote all areas. So the model that I use in my work is DIR floor time. And I think there's a big misconception out there that while we use it often with autism, we use it with all different kinds of kids and families. And I think we could all use more DIR floor time in our lives because it's all about supporting developmental levels that happen naturally in any human. So it doesn't pick apart those with vulnerabilities and those without. It's a way of supporting individual differences and expanding on those in a way that will help kids have the best quality of life and help parents have the best connection and quality of life as well. So I think the biggest takeaway for me in talking about communication as an occupational therapist, so my scope and my lens is it's similar but different from a speech and language pathologist in that we often work as a team with language delays or communication challenges. So I am not focused on the output and the language as much as a speech and language pathologist may be. I'm focused on lots of underlying things that go into communication, and then, of course, looking at the functional output. So, as an occupational therapist, I am working with kids to help them with motor development and learning and healthy behaviors and healthy emotional expression. So, my biggest areas are play, relate, and communicate. And I work with kids of all ages, but the predominant population that I work with is ages 2 to 7 or early childhood. So I've worked in early intervention in the home, so for ages birth to 3, and then now I'm in a private practice or outpatient setting. So the bulk of my kids are little ones in early childhood and elementary school. And I think the best part of what we do in DIR floor time is that we're always working with parents and families and caregivers and educators and everybody that is involved in the child's life. So the goal as an occupational therapist is to really be involved in getting to know the child in different settings. So it isn't just seeing them an hour a week in the clinic and then expecting that they'll be good to go. It's giving home strategies or home ideas and ways to empower the parents to work on this together. So the first thing I'll say also, or the multiple later things I will say rather, is that development happens so differently. So as we know, all kids are extremely different in when these things happen. So I think there's so much about developmental milestones out there these days, but just know that every nervous system is unique as a fingerprint. So we are supporting each individual child in different ways. Alrighty, so tip or technique number 1 is helping your child or determining how your child is best calm and capable in taking in the world. So as an OT, we call this being regulated. So being regulated or regulation is really the first kind of foundational step. This scarf is giving me a rash, yikes. Anyway, so being regulated is really the precursor to any other developmental milestone or going up the developmental ladder. So when they are able to be calm and organized, we are able to access the auditory and visual resources that we may not have otherwise. So if we're stressed or if we are emotionally going through some turmoil, then our resources to talk and listen are less. So you can think about this anytime where if you're really angry or upset with anybody, our listening goes way down. So we tend to kind of shut out the listening and focus more on protecting and surviving and getting through that interaction than we would on really articulating our thoughts and being there for expression. So regulation is kind of the baseline of everything. So if we don't have a child that is regulated, I'm not worried as much about how they're communicating or what they're saying. I'm worried about helping them to soothe and helping them determine ways to keep their body calm and regulated. So a lot of what I do on Thriving Littles is focused on books that I adore. So I'm always reading and finding different resources for parents to check out on their own. And this one, The Happiest Baby on a Block, Harvey Karp, is a really good one for looking at the child's different ways to soothe a child. And as an OT, we're looking at all different profiles. So some kids love to be swaddled or like that body input, and other kids hate being swaddled and don't like the body input at all. So some kids like to suck and have a pacifier and engage orally, and others don't like it. Some kids like lots of movement and need lots of movement, or most probably do. And other kids are kind of less inclined to move. So they might need support moving and figuring out how to activate or alert their body. So we're looking at this in all different ways and being an investigator and a detective and trying to figure out what makes them maximally regulated. So in looking at different levels of stress, the scale that I'm using is sleepy, drowsy, hypo-alert, focused and alert, hyper alert, and then having a tantrum, or the highest level would be having a tantrum or meltdown. So if a child is sleepy or drowsy, then they don't have as much activity to take in or respond or pick up on all of the communication going around them. Therefore, they'll be less likely to communicate and want to engage in that interaction. So when I'm thinking about kids, I'm thinking, what can we do to get them to that next level? So if they're under alert or hypo alert, I'm thinking, what can we do to get them focused and alert? Is this a child that needs more movement throughout their day? So maybe they need climbing specifically, or hanging specifically, or maybe they need more. Maybe it's an infant that needs to be swaddled at night. That really gives them that grounded feeling, and then they're more rested and ready to take on the next hour when they wake up. Or if a child is over alert, so hyper alert, which I think a lot of us these days tend to be in this hyper alert mode, or really always on the go, always thinking, then how can we help that child to calm? So go back to a level of calm, to get back to focused and alert. So we do this all day long as adults. So if we are working all day and have lots of brain resources and lots of brain power, and we are kind of hyper thinking or hyper alert, that's taking a lot of energy from our system. So the energy demands are much, much higher. And to balance that, maybe we will get home and go for a run at the end of the day. Or maybe we will meditate for a minute or breathe. So there's all different ways that we're naturally doing this for ourselves. And for kids, we are partners in helping them figure out their profile and what helps them to be regulated and calm. Because an adult partner soothing them kind of thousands of times throughout their lives, or lots and lots of repetitions, is what ultimately gives them the capacity to soothe themselves. So beginning at birth, we're learning how to regulate and work with our body and take an interest in the world and all of its sensations. So touch, sight, smell, taste, lots of different things happening that ultimately contributes to how we're learning. So when we can do this for kids, they're getting that internal sense of being able to do this for themselves or self-regulate on their own. So if they are posturally insecure or not secure in their body, then it will be tough for them to really access the auditory and visual resources that they need for communication. And one thing I have heard that I think is a red flag is that if a baby is never crying, or if a little one is never crying or never unhappy, then that can be a red flag, because that can tell us that they are under responsive, or they aren't able to activate themselves in a way to be available for others. So if they're always happy, they're likely that they may be internalizing it, or they may have difficulty with soothing in some way. So it's important to figure out and get a child engaged or active so they can take part in all of the communication attempts. So that was number one. It is helping your child be calm and capable of taking in the world. So helping them be regulated. And the next step is joint attention, or being an interpreter to their world. So surprise, I think it comes as a surprise that smiling at your little one and joining in whatever they're looking at. So if they're looking at the light, or if they're looking out the window, and you comment on that or respond with your eye gaze, or with a head turn, or with a facial expression, or even a babble. So whatever they're doing, if you can respond in the same way, then that is a really big way to build this joint attention that goes into promoting communication and promoting connection throughout their lives. Anytime we can consider ourselves an interpreter of their world. So how to do this at home, or how to do this more specifically, is if you are changing them. So changing is a really good time, because we want these things done kind of consistently throughout the day. So consistent daily techniques are what can help to shift the child's brain or the child's neurobiology. So one thing I like to recommend is that if we are changing the child, then we are commenting on what we're doing. So, okay, now I'm putting this over your other arm. And then also what I do is a multi-sensory engagement. So trying to get different senses involved to help a child make meaning of it and to help them learn. So I might hold their arm or tap their arm that the sleeve will be going into. And the hope is that they'll eventually start to lift up their arm and be part of it. So you can give space for that and wait, but what it's doing is creating this joint understanding of the world and a rich kind of sustained back and forth interaction that is the foundation of communication and language. So us telling, or us turning to look at them and connect visually before we put the sleeve on their arm is helping them to feel like they're part of it, and they're an active player or an active, powerful person in every interaction throughout the day. So we want them to have that sense of confidence and that sense of independence in a way that they'll participate. So what next? I think one note I wrote on this is that if they're bouncing around between objects and if they have a lot of fleeting attention. So of course, no toddler is probably sitting there for hours on end, sustaining in some activity. However, we want them to be able to get to kind of a rich, sustained level of play or interaction with us. So whether that's 20 back and forth interaction or repetitions of interaction, whatever that means for the particular child. So if they're not, then it's telling us that they need more of this being an interpreter to the world and joining their world versus trying to get them to be interested in what we're interested in. So responding with a clear message that we are there for them and we're in this together and we have our visual gaze is connected with them, all acts as an anchor for developing the foundations of language. So that's number 2, create or be an interpreter to their world. So number 3 is one of my favorites as an occupational therapist, which is movement and body. So the body really sets the stage for understanding themselves, which ultimately helps them understand how to be a communicator or a player in interaction. In the body, so the more sense of body awareness and the more sense of how to smile, how to orient their body to somebody, how to use their vision to engage, how to point or use gestures. So this helps them set the stage for how to use gestures on their own. And nonverbal communication is such a big role or such a big part of communication. So the more gestures they're using, or the more they're imitating us, it really sets the stage for communication. So if they are imitating movement all throughout the day, then that's a really good indicator that they are ready for more communication. So lots and lots of nonverbal gestures, I think, are often underlooked or overlooked in communication development, because as adults, we want them to speak and we want to hear what they're saying and we want to get the words out of their mouth and communicate with them in a conversation. However, there's so much going on under the surface that is really valuable. So anytime you're pointing or they're pointing and you point back, or anytime you say, what? Huh? What's going on? And they interpret that as like what you mean, and they find meaning in that, that's a really big way to encourage them for communication. So one thing I always recommend is limiting any time and equipment or devices that will limit their natural movement. So the more movement they can get throughout the day versus being in a rock and play or a swing or a walker, for example, and the more time they spend just on the floor or open, safe surfaces with climbing options that are safe for them, such as foam blocks or boxes or sides of the couch, really encourage them to explore and move. So the other thing I love is getting outside, because getting outside tends to be, one, it's a really, really rich sensory experience. And two, there are so many options outside for a child to be motivated and be into and be invested in. And it's something that we all have access to for the most part. So the more we can get outside, the more they can gain understanding of their body and how the properties of the world are interacting with it. And there's just so many good opportunities outside that I could recommend. Number 4 is slow our roll. So I think I say this a lot because, especially in our society today, which is so fast-paced, go, constantly on the move, there is a lot of pressure for kids to reach a certain milestone, or for kids to do more, or for kids to be interested in activities or hobbies. And this isn't always what I would say is the best for development by any means. So I think what is really positive for development is often doing less, or slowing down, or lowering the bar, if you will, because slowing our pace gives them the opportunity to develop the trust and warmth and connection and compassion from us, which motivates them to engage and initiate interaction. So if we are kind of flooding them with activities or flooding them with to-dos, and then we feel rushed and crazy as a result, then it isn't helping anybody really initiate or feel powerful and open the space for them to respond. So I think creating the opportunities and then letting them be. So one thing I often talk with families about is, if you are with your child for certain connection times, and be with them fully 100% during that time. And then when you're not, kind of let them be. So let them know that you are cooking dinner, or set the boundary about what you're doing, so that when you are with them, you can fully be 100% with them for those 15 minutes of play at night, or whatever it is that you have capacity for. So they really get that 100% of you and your attention in the moments, and then you can carve out time for setting boundaries and letting them know you're not available then. So the slightest cues that they are listening are big when it comes to early communication. So if they're giving any indicator of responding to you, then you have the time to acknowledge it and help interpret that for them. So let's say they aren't talking or they aren't using words at all, but if they are making a sound, or if they are kind of looking at something, you can say, I see your eyes. You want you want that cookie in that cupboard, or whatever it is. So that's helping open up the space for everybody to figure out the body and how they can be intentional and how they can feel like a powerful communicator. So the other tip I would say that's really a concrete one for this is to decrease the questions that we're asking, because when kids are learning language, it's really common for adults to be firing WH questions at kids. So when we want kids to learn language, our tendency is to ask, okay, what color is this? What's this? If you're looking at a bird outside, where does this go? Or what do you mean? Or say it again, say it again. So we're asking questions and we're really kind of pushing them to respond with language. However, kids really learn communication through us modeling it. So if you can interpret and have the space to join or repeat what they're trying to say, or say what you think they're trying to say. So if they're kind of, showing some disfluency or trouble formulating or getting it out there, and you say, oh, you saw the bird over there. You see the bird. I see you looking at it. I see you pointing. And maybe they're saying, but. So instead of saying, what is it? What is it? And giving them pressure, you're filling in the blank and then maybe opening up the space down the road for what they can say. So we really want to join them and take the pressure off of promoting or putting together that language if they're under stress at all. So I think even the littlest kids pick up on our energy and our feelings about them. So if we have this sense of competence or confidence in their competence, and if we are giving a vibe that says, you've got this, and I have time for you to formulate and for you to get your thoughts out or for you to show me, that's a really big way to give them confidence and help encourage that competence in them. So that is number 4, slow our roll. And number 5, so my final tip or technique with promoting early communication is creating a back and forth. So often in the work I do, we're all about creating a rhythm. So little ones have to understand that there's a rhythm or a dance in communication. So this back and forth reciprocal interaction, again, I think I've said this a lot of times, but it sets the stage for communication. So kids have to understand this rhythm and have a sense of their body rhythm and have a sense of them making something happen in order to want to communicate. So if they're pointing at something and they notice that you notice, then they feel like a powerful communicator and they feel like their needs and their wants are getting met. So then it encourages them to do that more and more. So if they're babbling, you're babbling back. And if they're saying something and you're saying it back, that's telling them, yep, I understand you. I get you. There's a rhythm to this. We're in this together. And I am helping you to expand on this in a way that will help them with communication. So kids have the innate desire to feel like powerful communicators. And one thing I noticed was that there was a post recently that said that there was some judgment because somebody was saying that her child wasn't communicating because they didn't want to versus they could not. And I think it's really, really dangerous judgment that that person made, because kids do have an internal innate sense of wanting to engage with the world and wanting to communicate and wanting to participate. So if they don't, that's showing us there's red flags that we need to help the child work on and help the child figure out, because we're all trying to figure out kind of things that we need all throughout our life. So when they're little, it's a really big time that we need to have that confidence in them and understand that they can do it. It's just some roadblock in their way that hopefully we can reduce or eliminate through our environment or through our interaction or connection with them. So the more they realize that their actions have an effect on the environment and on others, the stronger their motivation will be to engage and communicate with others. So I think that's a super important note and takeaway. So how do we do this? How do we keep this rhythmic interaction going? So again, it's all about picking up on what the child is interested in. So if they think you're doing something silly, so if they think you are putting something in your mouth so the baby laughs, or So then you might say, you like that. You want me to do it again. Or just do it again and just keep it going. So you're doing something silly, they're responding somehow. Then you do it again. Then they respond. Then you do it again. Then they respond. Then you do it a little bit differently and they respond. So that's really strengthening the back and forth that goes into the rhythm of language and communication. So even eye gaze. So if they're looking at you and you are looking back, or if they are, I'm trying to think if they're doing something silly, sticking out their tongue, and you do it back and they do it, that's strengthening the glue of sustained attention and regulation that goes into all engagement and relating. What else? So I think the more that the child can stay in it, and the more that we're getting into their world and knowing what they're interested in and what is motivating to them, then the more that we are promoting their communication. So motorically, or if they're having difficulty with the motor movements of their mouth, then this is all done, of course, absolutely with a speech and language pathologist. So these are not kind of sole kind of solution to all communication challenges by any means. So I think that's an important disclaimer. But I wanted to show you a couple of other books that I love. So for kids and figuring out their profile and what they need throughout the day, this one is Raising a Sensory Smart Child. So it's by Lindsay Beal. She's an occupational therapist. And then Nancy Pesky, who is a parent that she wrote it with. So it goes through kind of sensory diets, which is basically movements that you can put in throughout the day in a way that will help the child be regulated. And I think interaction and engagement from a trusted caregiver is one of the biggest powerful sensory diet activities. So keep that in mind as you're reading it. Then another book that I love is Your Self-Confident Baby by Magda Gerber, because she is really amazing for just letting the child explore and trust that they will do what is best to promote their development. And if they're not, then that's where we need to get into other kind of avenues and investigate and explore and help figure it out. So Magda Gerber is all about, she's the one who says that put 100% in and then let them be another time. So you're finding ways to be fully present with them. This is a good one. And then finally, for reading the child's cues and helping them to be secure and calm. So in early childhood and then later elementary years and beyond, Stanley Greenspan has lots of good resources out there. This one is called The Secure Child, and it's a favorite of mine. So that is it for today. I hope you will check me out and follow me on Instagram or friend me. Follow is such a weird word, but I think at Thriving Littles, I would love to connect with you. And then my website, www.thrivinglittles.com. Otherwise, reach out with any questions, and just don't contact my personal account because I'm rarely on that, and I had to post this video from my personal account. So it will probably be a while if you message that one. And that is it. I think the final thing I will say is that there's so much pressure and stress that goes on with kids these days. And if they have vulnerabilities, that can be even more so. So I think the more that we can learn kind of self-acceptance in ourselves and self-acceptance in our kids and help them to understand kind of strengths they have or areas of weakness that they may have, because we all have them, as everybody knows. I think that is one of the most powerful things that we can do. And so we're kind of doing all the things to promote their development, but also just appreciating where they are and how far they've come and how far we have made it together. So everything that you're doing, and kind of sit back and look at that, because I think that doesn't happen very often, especially with parents with kids with different vulnerabilities or differences. So take care, enjoy the rest of the weekend, and hope you'll reach out and see me soon.